Hello, everyone. I welcome you to Book Talk, where today I am having a conversation with five lovely ladies who all write historical romance. And rather than try and introduce all of you, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves because these are all writers who, if you love historicals and historical romance, you will adore getting to know about them. They write different time periods, different locations, and so we're going to have the best fun talking about their books, their writing journey, and lots of other things. So Rachel, we'll start with you. Can you tell us real quickly who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, sorry, I'm Rachel Fordham, and I have written, I have five published historical novels, most of them taking place in the late 1800s. I have a really busy household. I foster, and I've got 6 kids plus fosters, so it's busy. I homeschool, and I love all things historical.
That's awesome. Amanda, I'll come over to you.
Okay, I'm Amanda Cabot. I am the author of more than 40 published books, which tells you I've been writing for a long, long time, and we will not say how long that's been. About half of them are historicals. Early on, I wrote contemporaries, and I actually did a series of contemporaries for Revell, but my heart is in historicals, and very specifically in the second half of the 19th century.
Awesome. Now, Laura, I'm going to come down to you.
Oh, great. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you. I'm Laura Frantz, and I stay mostly in my beloved 18th century. Occasionally, I'll leap out to the 19th or back to the 17th, but I have, thanks to Revell, 13 published novels, and my 14th is coming out next January, another Scottish novel. So stay tuned. Cover reveal this week.
Oh, that's always fun. There have been a lot of cover reveals this week, which is a lot of fun to see.
Yes.
All right, Stephenia.
Hi, I'm Stephenia McGee. I have 14 books that I've written, but my very first one is coming out with Revell in October. It's called The Secrets of Emberwild, and I'm super excited about it because I have a degree in equine science, and I actually got to use it for a story, for my horse story. So I'm really excited about that.
And the cover is gorgeous. Yeah, it is. It's really fun. Okay, and Anne, last but definitely not least.
Well, I'm Amanda Cabot. I have written a lot of different types of books. I've published about somewhere between 35 and 40. I'm always losing count. Some of them were for young adults. I've published some mysteries. Some were historical romances in the general market. But since I've been with Revell, I think it's about 24 books that I've published with Revell, and I have been mostly historical. There were 3 cozy mysteries stuck in there too. I jump around in time period. I have some in the 1800s, I have some in the 1900s, and even have 3 in the 1960s. So I just go wherever my characters lead me.
That's so fun. And I think it's really interesting because you do hit a point. I was doing this last night on my bookshelf, going and trying to count and go, how many books do I have out now? And what's the number? And you really do. You hit a point where you're like, well, it's around this many. But as you guys were talking about the time periods you write, one of the things that I always think is interesting is, why did you pick your time period? So I'm writing 2 World War II novellas right now. And for me, it was because I love those classic movies. I love the music from the 30s and 40s. And so it just made sense. World War II, I think, is so interesting that when I was like, okay, I'm going to write some historical, that was my time period. How did y'all land on your time period? And so Stephenia, I'll start with you on this one.
I picked 1905 for my Emberwild book. A couple of reasons. One, I love the turn of the century. I think it's a really interesting time. You're getting electricity, you're getting cars, you're getting, kind of that mix of modern with what I was doing in the mid 1800s with that same kind of feel. And then it was also a time when harness racing started to become a thing. And so that plays a big part in my story. And so I had a lot of fun with researching how they did that and what it looked like. And so it was a good time fit for what I wanted to do.
Awesome. And how about you, Anne? Because you've jumped around. So it's your characters who kind of lead you to the time period?
Well, sometimes I pick a historical event, and that will push me into a particular time period. I have written a lot of books that have a war background, and some of those have been World War II, some World War One. So it sometimes is a historical event. With my new book, When the Meadow Blooms, I actually don't have a historical event in it, but I picked 1925 because it is between the two wars, and I could concentrate on the characters and their problems without having other historical events to interfere with their lives. In a way, we had historical events, but they were more personal historical events.
But and it's so true, because when you're dealing with an event like a war, there are things that happen that people know about. And so if you don't get those lined up right, readers will let you know. So it is kind of nice when you can pull back and be like, well, we can just kind of have life and not be so focused on, no, this happened on that day or that day. So Laura, someone who's watching is like, I've read all of her books and I love Courting Marrow Little. So that seems like a great segue to talk about why the 18th century for you.
Such a good question. You know, when The Frontiersman's Daughter, my debut novel, came out in 2009, there was not much colonial American fiction in the Christian market anyway. I don't read, you know, at that time I didn't read a lot of general market, but it remains kind of a under represented maybe time period. I think it's getting traction. I heard once that the sweet spot for historicals is the American West in the latter 19th century, which I think that's very true. And I love that myself, but I chose to write in the 18th century because all those founding fathers and mothers and fathers, I should say, I love, and it was just a kind of a big roiling pot of stuff. I mean, it's great novel fodder. So I will die before I write all the novels in the 18th century I hope to write, because it's just, there's so much inspiration there. But thank you for reading all my books. I'm so delighted.
Yeah, and it is true that it's such a rich time period, because there's just so much with the war for independence, all the political struggles, all those things going on. And then there's the frontier life. And so I could see where you would never run out of ideas. So Amanda, how did you find your sweet spot in the historical time frame?
You know, as I'm listening to Laura, I'm thinking, you know, I really should have written in that time period. I used to live in Philadelphia. In fact, my office looked out on the Liberty Bell before they moved it.
Oh, so cool.
And I mean, that's a part of American history that I've always loved, but I've never written about it. I can't even tell you why. Well, actually, I suppose I could say why the second half of the 19th century appealed to me, and that's because of the Civil War. Now, we're not set any books during the war. I've had a series before the war, like around 1856, and then the ones in early 1880s where people are still having the aftermath of the war. I'm not sure I could write a war book. They're kind of grim, but looking at the time period building up to a war and then the aftermath, particularly in the South, where you have Reconstruction and deep, deep wounds. So don't know if that answered the question.
No, it does. Well, and I think that that's, regardless of what time period we write, there has to be that connection, that kind of passion underlying for it. Because I don't know about y'all, but when I'm writing a book, I know I have to be in love with the idea for 2 years. Because from writing the proposal to getting it accepted, to writing the book, to marketing, editing, all of that, it takes about 2 years. So just to write a book really doesn't work for me, because I know I have to stay connected, because otherwise I'm looking at the back cover going, what was this book about? Why did I write it? I don't know. And so finding that time period where for whatever reason we feel connected, or I love what you were saying earlier, Stephenia, about, you know, you were able to finally write a horse book when that's obviously part of your passion because of your degree. And so finding those connections, I think, is so important. So Rachel, how did you find your sweet spot in historical?
Yeah, well, I kind of have, everything about writing for me has been on accident. So I decided to write about orphan trains, and it just happened to be in the late 1800s. And then Ravel was like, why don't you just stay there for a little while? And I was that's what I did. I actually have a 1920s book that's in the works. So I'm still open-minded at this point. I'm not so deep in that I'm locked into anything yet.
That's awesome. And that's one reason it's great to work with editors and publishers is sometimes they can see, hey, this is your sweet spot. And that leads to a question from Jenny on, she'd love to know if your first book was in your sweet spot or if you kind of had to write around to find it. So Laura, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, my first book, The Frontiersman's Daughter, way back in 2009, as I said, was definitely my sweet spot because I had grown up dreaming of being the daughter of Daniel Boone. And that's where that novel, which took me 10 years to write, came from. I 10 years because of all the wildcrafting in the novel. I wanted to get that right. I was also raising 2 little boys and I didn't want to, take time away from them. So it was a long process, but definitely my sweet spot. I got to write about Daniel Boone's daughter in that book and kind of live my childhood dream. So that was my sweet spot for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. How about you, Anne?
Well, my first book was a long time ago, probably before some of you all discovered America, as my preacher used to say. It was actually published in 1978 by Warner Books, and it was a novel about the settling of Kentucky. So it was the pioneer days. But for Revell, my first published book for Revell was Scent of Lilacs, which was set in the 1960s. So, I don't know that I have a sweet spot. I just like to jump around to wherever it works best. I did think a while ago when Amanda was saying she didn't like to write about wars. I have at times said I need a war because when you have the war, it's sort of like gives you an outline of what happens and where you characters can get involved in history. But I haven't written about a war for a while, so.
It is true because you kind of have these events that you can bracket the rest of your story around, which is kind of nice. So Rachel, how about you? Do you feel like from that first book you kind of knew, or was it a process of your editor helping you find it?
I think I discovered that I like to pick small pieces of history and build stories around it. But I think that I will hopefully in a few years be like Anne and be like, I love jumping around.
Yeah.
Sorry, did that go through?
Yeah. Amanda, how about you?
Well, my first book, which was published, oh, dare I admit this, in 1981, was a short contemporary romance. But my first book for Revell definitely was in the sweet spot. That was set in something like 1856, and it was the period right before the Civil War. So, yeah.
And I think sometimes their sweet spot can shift the more books we write too, that we don't necessarily have to stay in one place the whole time. How about you, Stephenia?
I have not stayed in one place. I wrote several Civil War stories, mostly because I live close to Natchez and they have the old houses and they do the pilgrimage where everybody dresses up in the gowns. And that is truthfully my favorite part. I love the dresses. So I wrote a lot of Civil War stories. And then I decided I wrote a women's fiction book and I had fun with that. And then I wrote time travel because I love history. And so wouldn't it be cool if I got to go back in the past and see what that was like? And now my Revell books are 1905 and 1918. And I think my next one that I want to play with is going to be 1922. So I don't really know that I have a specific time that is my sweet spot. I just love finding interesting things in history and putting my characters in that time and place and seeing what it would be like to be there.
How many of us, when we were growing up, wanted to be in Gone with the Wind? With the big hoop skirts and all that. I always thought that would be fun until I realized no electricity and no running water. And I went, on second thought, I'm really glad I'm born now. So another question that we have is, what do you like to do when you aren't writing? So Rachel, do you want to share that first?
Sorry. Okay, I didn't really hear you because I think my internet's cutting in and out.
Oh, okay. What do you like to do when you aren't writing?
When I'm not writing. Okay. So life's really busy. So I don't really, we like to go on road trips and we live on an island. So we go to the beach all the time. We play lots of board games. games, mostly just kid stuff. That's the phase I'm in.
Yeah, and that's a busy phase. How about you, Laura? What do you like to do when you're
Well,
not writing?
we live at the gateway of Olympic National Park out here in Washington. So, you know, the weather is cool and damp a lot of the time, but I love to take walks. I love to cook. I just love to sit by the fire, which we do about 9 months of the year, and just write, you know, relax, read. I don't have a lot of time for pleasure reading. Sure, you all can understand that, but it's mostly research. But I love to research. So sitting by the fire and researching is what I do most of the time.
That's so fun. How about you, Amanda? Is it IT all the time?
Oh, no, thank goodness, no, not anymore. No, I've retired from that. I do a lot of reading, and I do make time for pleasure reading because I love the escapism of that. Like Laura, I like to cook, so I do that. I sew, I knit, I watch old movies, and when we can, my husband and I take road trips, but that's been kind of limited recently.
Yeah. And Anne, how about you?
Well, you know, I like to go on walks with my dogs. I like to look for, take pictures of the things I see out on the farm and share them on Facebook. I really enjoy reading. I do make time for it too, but I'm like Laura, you don't always have as much reading time as you would like to have. I like talking to people on Facebook and blogging with and getting blogs and that sort of thing with my readers. And I love, of course, when my grandkids come to visit. So that's always good.
Yeah. And Stephenia, how about you?
When I am not chasing children and taking them to track practice or baseball, I'm usually at a baseball game. I generally carry a book around with me. So I've got research on my lap, and I posted a picture the other day of a book I'm reading, and the ball field is behind me because I'm reading in between games. And so life's pretty busy right now. And other than reading, I don't know that I have any hobbies of anything that I really do. I play with my dog.
Yeah. Well, and you know, when we have younger kids, there is just a different rhythm to life. And that's, I can't tell you how many chapters I wrote at swim meets and gymnastics meets. And I need to really do that again this summer. And so, you know, there's just a different rhythm to it. So another question that has come in is, do you write every day or do you binge write? So kind of what's your process for that? And so I go back and forth. Like right now, I'm going to have to do a couple binge days where it's 5,000 or 6,000 words a day, but I try to do more kind of consistent over time. How do y'all do it? Let's see. Amanda, we'll start with you.
Well, I write, I'm very disciplined and I have a very strict schedule. So I write every morning and I don't binge write because I can't be creative at that time. I find that morning writing works the best for me. So that's what I do. And I do that 6 days a week.
That's awesome. How about you, Anne?
Well, it's according to whether I have a deadline coming up, how much I write. Generally, once I finish a story, which I just did in May, I take a couple of months off to maybe explore other things. Right now, I am playing with doing the narration on some of my books that didn't get an audio contract. So that's taking up a lot of my time. And I'm researching for the next book, which I'm not as disciplined as Amanda, but I wish I was. I write every day. Once I write that chapter 1, I do try to write, well, at least 6 days a week, not maybe on Sunday.
Yeah. How about you, Stephenia? What's your kind of writing rhythm?
During the school year, my boys went back to private school this year. The last 3 years we did homeschool, so writing was whenever I could squeeze it in. But this last year I do really well with, I get up in the morning and once they go to school, I'll spend 2 to 3 hours writing, and then I spend the afternoons doing other stuff. COVID kind of got me on this last book, and I had like a month and a half that my brain was dead. So I ended up binge writing on a writing getaway, and I wrote 30,000 words in 5 days. And then my brain was dead again. So it just depends.
And deadlines are phenomenal for kind of making it a priority. And so, Laura, what's your rhythm?
You know, I've been writing so long, since stories since about age 7. So a day that I'm not writing feels off to me, because it's just been, I think it's habitually been such a part of my life that it just, I just don't feel good if I'm not writing. But there are days, like when I was traveling recently, I didn't write a lick for like a month. And that was hard for me, but I love it. I feel fulfilled and complete. And we've reached the empty nest stage recently, which is quite the transition. You get all kinds of, you get a full fridge and lots more time to write, but you just, it's an interesting phase. Sometimes it's hard to sit down, when the sun's out or something, or you need to garden or whatever.
Yeah. And how about you, Rachel? Do you write every day or binge?
I am a feast or famine, so it's kind of all over the place. And I'll write a lot all at once. We just took in a baby, so I'm kind of like trying to find my groove again. So I'm back to the nap time writing. So
Yeah. Well, and with fostering, that would kind of keep things chaotic, because you've always got kids kind of coming and going at different ages,
right.
which is amazing. That's awesome. And I know that I woke up this morning going, I have got to get words down. And normally I'm like you, Amanda. I know I'm going to write a chapter every day when I'm on deadline. And I know I can write 2,000 words in an hour and a half. And this summer's felt very chaotic. And I'm like, okay, I've just got to figure out what the right time is, because it changes it used to be late at night, and now I'm thinking I'm going to have to get up in the morning, which just makes my heart hurt. But everybody has their own pace and their own way of doing it. So another question, which I think is great, because there are people listening who haven't read some of your books. What's the book that you're most proud of, that you think a reader who's discovering you for the first time, that's the place they should start? So Laura, I'll start with you.
The fan favorite, I guess, would be Courting Mar-a-Little, which was my second novel. Of course, I'm sure there are people that don't like that novel, but that's the novel I hear most about. That was way back in 2010. So maybe start with that one if you like the frontier. But I also, kind of veer into more civilized areas like Colonial Williamsburg and even Scotland. So I even did a series in Pennsylvania, my one and only series. So whatever kind of piques your interest there, just peruse and pick.
How about you, Amanda? Which one would you say, hey, this is the one to start with if you want to know what my writing's like?
Well, one of my favorite books is A Stolen Heart. It's the first one in the, which series is that? Oh, Cimarron Creek. I had to look I've got my book covers framed up on the wall. And part of why that is so special to me is I had written a contemporary series right before it. And when I went back to writing this historical, it felt like coming home. I mean, not that I didn't enjoy writing the contemporaries, but this just felt really good. And from my view, that's one of my best books.
That's awesome. Rachel, how about you?
What's wrong with my voice? I really enjoyed I like them all, I guess, but I loved my last book, A Lady in Attendance. And I think maybe because it was a challenge, I got to write a character who was a quieter male lead. And it was really satisfying to have him be a romantic hero. So.
Oh, that's fun. And Anne, how about you?
Well, the one that a lot of people have told me that they read first, and one that's a story close to my heart, is Angel Sister. Because I based a lot of the background of that book on my mom's memories of growing up during the Great Depression era. But then I have the Shaker books. A lot of people have enjoyed the Shaker books and always are saying, why don't you write another Shaker book? And I have said I'm not going to at least a dozen times, and have changed my mind. But I'm like some of the others. It's a book you're writing now sometimes, or the one you just wrote that you might recommend the most. But usually I tell people Angel Sister when they ask me a specific book, unless they like the 60s, and then I go back to the Heart of Holly Hill series.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. And I always say it's kind of like asking which one's your favorite kid? Which is your favorite book that you've written? And so it can be really hard to answer. How about you, Stephenia?
I think for me, it would probably be a book called In His Eyes. It takes place right at the end of the Civil War. And I had a lot of fun with that book because it's a real house. And we went up there to Belmont, and
Oh,
not
nice.
the Belmont in Tennessee. There's a Belmont in Mississippi, right on the Mississippi River. And we did the whole book launch there. The cover model was in the dress we had, and they still sell books up there at Belmont. And so that one to me is a really fun connection when readers talk to me about, oh, I saw the house and I saw your book. And I think it's been one of my best sellers. So that would probably be the one that I would say.
That's awesome. So here's another question. I love it. We're getting all kinds of questions from listeners right now, which is so much fun. For your stories, and we've talked a little bit about this, but kind of around the edges. So with the books that you're writing, do the ideas kind of come to you, or how do you find them? Is it research? Is it the character comes to you? And I know for me, it kind of goes from book to book. Sometimes I'll see something in research that'll spark the idea for a book. Other times it's a character I want to write. So which is it for you? How do you come up with kind of that spark, that what if that's going to turn into the story? So Anne, we'll start with you.
Well, of course, I've had a lot of what ifs, and it's really hard sometimes to pinpoint that initial idea that comes along. Of course, I did those books, Rosie Corner, that were based on Mom's memories, or that's how it started. And then I followed the family. I did the Holly Hill books based sort of on my memories of growing up in the 1960s. And then I did have come across little stories in my research. That was certainly the spark for River to Redemption. I found a true life story, just a very short thing about a slave that had done some remarkable things during the cholera epidemic. So I decided to write a book on how that happened. So I'm just all over the place with the way ideas come up.
Yeah. How about you, Stephenia?
I'd have to say the same. I have found interesting tidbits in research, or one time I found this article about this soldier that went up to somebody's house and said, "Excuse me, can I please just die on your porch?" And I was like, "Oh, that's terrible." And I had this whole story idea of what would that be like if this man came and did that. Or just one of the books I found writing on the wall. We visited the house and there was this writing all along the top of the old kitchen wall. And I was like, wow, who would do that and why? And so that kind of sparked story ideas. So yeah, it's kind of the same for me. It just depends on something I've seen that was interesting, or a character idea that came to me. I really wanted to write a horse lady, horse trainer. So mine started with a character for that one. So it just depends.
Yeah. How about you, Amanda?
Well, I'm pretty much like Anne. Can't tell you where for specific books. Sometimes I'm doing research and I find something that sounds interesting. Sometimes it's just a whole time period. And I start saying, what would it have been like to live then? What were the challenges that people faced? So it's not a specific fact. It's more the questions of just trying to put myself in a different time period and think, what would it be like? And especially for women in the 19th century, what constraints were put on them? And a lot, obviously. And what could they be doing? What kinds of careers could they have? So it's all over the place.
Yeah. And those are the kinds of questions that really do get us to start thinking, like, what were the constraints? Well, everything from a corset to, you have to have chaperones and you can't do all these things. And I'm always like, I love the kind of romance of antebellum world, and all the big houses and the big skirts. I'm like, I would have shriveled up and died or been stoned, one of the two. But then, you're always a product of your time and your place too. And so thinking about how that impacts things is huge. Rachel, where do you get your ideas? Is it, does it come from your research, or is it all kind of just dreaming up and you see a movie in your head?
Some of both. Like my most recent story, I was thinking about like Les Mis and how like someone's life is changed by one decision. And so I thought, well, how could I throw that into the late 1800s? And then it just kind of grew from there. So all different ways.
I love that. and I was teaching a class for like middle school writers yesterday, and it was so cute because we were talking about all these different stories, and they spark other ideas, and you twist it up and you come up with something totally
Right.
fresh and new. So how about you, Laura?
It would have to be, especially because the current book I'm writing is set in Scotland. I get a lot of inspiration from my family history and my ancestry. And I have readers, just one this morning sent me the most wonderful story about her ancestress, I guess you'd say, from up in Boston. And it was just, deserves her own novel. But my family ancestry, especially in Scotland, they were wild creatures, especially in the medieval, age, and it makes me want to write a medieval novel, but just a treasure trove there. And it's been preserved because they were somewhat well known. And that history is on record now. And it's just, my mouth hangs open. I just can't write fast enough. So.
Oh, that's so fun. Okay, so we've only got a couple more minutes. So I want to go through one more question from the panel, and then we'll do a couple really quick fun ones. So not that these haven't been fun, but you know what I mean. So who is your favorite author to read? And I'm like, I would have to say it depends on the genre. It literally depends on the genre, because for every genre, I probably have my go-to list of 4 or 5. Because this year I've read 67 books. I think it was Anne who said, reading for pleasure. And then some of them are research. Rachel, when you get to read, if you get to read, who's that go-to? If it comes in the door, you're going to sit down and you're going to read it first.
Well, I've never missed a Laura Frantz book, so I'll claim that one.
Good answer. Amanda, how about you? Who's
Anne Gabhart. She's right here. I absolutely love her books. And yes, Angel Sister is my favorite.
Oh, that's so fun. Stephenia, how about you?
I don't know. You should have seen my cart when I went to Baker Book House. I have tons of everything. There's probably 5 or 6 authors that I have all of their books. I haven't read all of them, but I have them all. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's a hard question. Laura, how about you?
I've read every one of you here and absolutely love your books. And I'm just amazed at the breadth and scope of how different we all are and how we write. But Liz Curtis Higgs, her fiction to me is just, and she hasn't written a fiction title in a while. And so if you're listening, Liz, and you probably aren't, please return to writing fiction. I mean, her nonfiction is great, but her fiction is truly outstanding.
Yeah, it is really good. And how about you, Anne? Who's your go-to?
I'm sort of like Stephenia here. I just don't know that I have a go-to. I enjoy a variety of writers. I haven't read a couple of you, but I'm going to have to try to find some of your books and read them now. But of course, I've read Laura and Amanda, and there's so many good books out there right now in the Christian market, especially that you can just pick up anybody and find a good story.
Yeah, it's so true. I love it because when I was growing up and reading voraciously, it was Frank Peretti, Michael Phillips, Jeanette Oak, the 10As, and then all y'all started writing, and then I started writing, and it's like it just keeps exploding, which is so much fun. Okay, so a couple really quick questions. And these are kind of more like just kind of pop out the first thing. What's your favorite writing snack or drink? Rachel.
Oh, I don't have a favorite. I'm boring. Water and whatever's around.
Hey, that's how life is sometimes. Laura?
Iced tea and buttered popcorn.
Ooh, that does sound good. Stephenia?
Coffee. If I don't have my coffee, my fingers don't work. So
yeah. Coffee is a staple. Anne, how about you?
I like black tea, unsweet. I have a warmer on my desk, and I need that tea when I'm writing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And how about you, Amanda?
Tea.
Yeah.
Hot tea.
That's interesting. I think we got 3 tea people here. So that's fun. I go back and forth between coffee and tea, or my sparkling water. How about, does writing energize or exhaust you, Amanda?
Energize.
Rachel?
Definitely.
Energize.
Laura,
Energize.
Stephenia,
Energized. Yeah, I love it.
Anne?
It's according to how easy the words come, but energized when they come easy.
And I was going to say, like, right now it's exhausting because I'm struggling to get this thing finished. And then I know I have another one I have to start immediately. But then there are those days where it's just like it all flows and the fingers are flying and it's so much fun. And you're just like, I could do this all day. And those are the ones that carry me through. And I'm like, okay, now like plotting is work for me. That getting started is just, bleh. But okay. Oh, this is a good one because I need practice on this. This will be the last question. How do you celebrate, or if it was me, if you celebrate when you finish a book, what do you do? Laura.
You know, I always mark the occasion by buying something, even if it's small. Last book for Heart Adrift, and it really didn't have anything to do with the novel, except my characters drink a lot of tea, is I got the most charming tea ornament. And so that's how I marked the occasion. You know, it was only what, you know, just a few dollars, but it just delighted my heart.
Oh, I love that. Amanda, do you celebrate in some way when a book's done?
Nope, because there's always the next one that I'm writing right after it.
Exactly. That's where I fall. I'm always like, oh, I should celebrate. At least let my kids celebrate that it's done. Because I just go right to the next. Anne, how about you?
I pick up a book that's on my to be read pile and read a book.
I
for
love
pleasure.
that. How about you, Rachel?
I don't have a set thing. I usually give myself a break and read and I don't know, regroup.
Yeah. And that's sometimes I think, especially for type A's like me, we just tend to go from task to task and forget to stop and celebrate and just breathe before turning to the next one. And how about you, Stephenia?
My sweet husband usually takes me out to dinner. He'll usually take me to get sushi or a steak or something to kind of celebrate. Yay, I'm done with this. And I have a few days off. So
that's awesome. Because it's a huge accomplishment anytime someone finishes a book. And so I think it's great if people can kind of build that into their kind of rhythm of writing. But I clearly have to still work on it. Well, our time has flown by. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been so much fun to learn more about your books and introduce people to you and your writing. So thank you so much. And I hope you've had a good time because I sure have.
thank you.
Thank you.